She told me in the morning she don't feel the same about us in her bones.
Hey everyone, and welcome to today's lesson. In today's lesson, we'll be talking about zeros and negative numbers as exponents. Now, if you remember, earlier in the year we discussed the concept of exponents, and it's a way to represent repeated multiplication. So for example, if I was repeatedly multiplying 3 times 3 times 3 times 3, another way to write that is 3 to the fourth power, since I'm multiplying the number 3 4 times. Well, today we're going to look at what happens if 0 is my exponent, or what happens if a negative number is my exponent. First is zeros as exponents, and this is an easy one. If 0 is the exponent, 1 is the answer. In other words, any number to the 0 power is 1. So for example, 4 to the 0 power, 1. Negative 2 to the 0 power, 1. 0.587 to the 0 power, 1. Any number to the 0 power is equal to 1. Not too bad, right? Well, with negative exponents, we see something a little bit different. A negative exponent gets rewritten as a fraction. So, if I had any non-zero number x and any integer n as my exponent, I can see that x to the negative n is equal to 1 over x to the n. An example of this would look like this. X to the negative fourth is equal to 1 over x to the fourth. X to the negative 2 is then equal to 1 over 3 squared, which is equal to 1 over 9. So you can see that if I have a negative number as an exponent, it gets put into the denominator. Let's go ahead and do a little practice here. In question number 1, we're writing the simplified form of each expression. I could have negative numbers as the exponent, or I could have 0. Let's look at A. I've got 4 to the negative third power. This gets rewritten as 1 over 4 to the third power. If I reference my exponent sheet, I know that 4 to the third power is 64, so my final answer is 1 over 64. B. I've got negative 5 to the 0 power. I know that anything to the 0 power is 1. Done with that one. Now, for C, 3 to the negative 2 power. Well, I know that's 1 over 3 to the second power. 3 to the second power is 9, so my final answer is 1/9. Moving over here to D, I've got 6 to the negative 1 power, which is 1 over 6 to the first power. And 6 to the first power is just 6, so my final answer is 1 over 6. Alright, last one for this section. I've got 4 to the negative 2 power. This is equal to 1 over 4 to the second power. And we know that 4 to the second power is 16, so my final answer is 1 over 16. Alright, let's put some variables in the mix. In part 2, we are still simplifying the expression, but now we're working with variables. Alright, x to the negative 9. If it's a negative number, it belongs in the denominator. So 1 over x to the 9th. For part B, we see something we haven't seen before. I've got a negative exponent in the denominator. What happens here is this negative exponent in the denominator moves up to the numerator. So 1 over n to the negative 3 is equal to n to the third. So if I've got a negative exponent in the denominator, it gets moved up to the top. Let's look at another one. In part C, since I have multiplication, I treat each one of these terms independently. So if I rewrite this, this is 4 times 1 over c to the third power times b. If I rewrite this all together, I have 4b in the numerator, and I've got c to the third in the denominator. Notice how each part was independent. I rewrote it by simplifying and then combined all my terms. In part D, you see I have a negative number in the denominator, a negative exponent rather. That exponent needs to be moved to the top. So I have 2a to the third is my final answer. In part E, I've got a negative exponent in the numerator. It needs to be shifted to the denominator. So my final answer is 1 over m squared n to the fifth. Notice when I move n to the negative fifth out of the numerator, I'm still left with 1 up top. Okay, 1 is that placeholder in my numerator. All right, let's flip to the back. On the top of the back, we are again simplifying the expression, but then we're going to evaluate when we're given a value for either n or w. In this case, n is -2 and w is 5. So first step is to simplify. In part A, I know that anything to the 0 power is 1, so w to the 0 power just becomes 1. So I'm left with n to the -4 times 1. A negative exponent gets moved to the denominator, so this is 1 over n to the fourth. Now it's time to evaluate. I'm told that n is -2, so 1 over -2 to the fourth power. I've got a negative number raised to an even power, so I know my answer is going to be positive. If I refer to my exponent table, I know that 2 to the fourth power is 16, so my final answer is 1 over 16. Alright, looking at B, I've got a negative exponent in the numerator, so that needs to get moved to the denominator. I'm left with 1 as the placeholder up top, so I have n to the first times w squared on the bottom. Let's go ahead and substitute in our values. I know n is -2 and w is 5, and that's squared. So I'll jump down just to the bottom here. That's 1 over -2 times 25. And I'm going to write my final answer just to the left of the problem. So my final answer is -1 over 50. That's 2 times 25. All right, looking at part C. I know anything to the 0 power is 1, so when I rewrite this, when I simplify, I get 1 over w to the sixth. When I substitute in to evaluate, I get 1 over 5 to the sixth power. I can again refer to my exponent table. I know that 5 to the sixth power is 15,625. And that'll be my final answer. Last example before you get to try. I've got 1 over n times w to the -first power. Since I have a negative exponent in the denominator, it gets moved up to the top. So when I simplify, I've got w over n. To evaluate, I know that w equals 5 and n equals -2, so my final answer is -5 over 2. Alright, now it's your turn. I want you to try the self-quiz and then check your answers. Alright, on the self-quiz, you should have had the following answers. 4 to the -2 power is equal to 1 over 16. 12.72 to the 0 power is going to equal 1. Anything to the 0 power is 1. In question number 2, you had to simplify the expression. We had some variables involved here. So I've got 12 over y to the third and z to the fourth. And for part B, you should have had 2 times c to the seventh. I have a negative exponent in the denominator. It needs to get moved up to the top. Now the last problem, number 3, you had to simplify and then evaluate. So when I simplify, I get 4 divided by x to the third, and then y squared stays up top. Okay, that x to the negative third had to be moved to the bottom. And then I plug in my values. So I've got 4 times 4 squared divided by negative 2 to the third power. On the top, 4 squared is 16 times 4 is 64. It's also 4 to the third power. And on the bottom, negative 2 to the third power is negative 8. 64 divided by negative 8 is negative 8. There you go, folks. If you missed any of the self-quiz questions, please go back and check your work. Make sure you get the right answer. And if you thought that self-quiz was just a little bit too easy, feel free to try these challenge questions down below. That's it for now. I hope you learned a lot about zero and negative exponents. Come to class ready to ask questions.